Gracias. Y es que el tema de las fluctuaciones, de la variabilidad de la energía renovable es un tema al que tenemos que prestar atención y que sigue generando inquietudes. Con la cantidad de recursos que tenemos en el Caribe, es importante saber cuáles son las condiciones que tenemos para lograr esa integración adecuada de la energía renovable en nuestra región. Vamos a recibir la presentación del doctor Devon Gardner, que es el gerente del Programa de Energía de la Comunidad del Caribe, para que nos explique cuál es la situación de la región del Caribe.
Buenos días, senores. Thank you very much, Madam. I'm going to try to walk you within the next few minutes through some of the integration programs that have taken place within the context of the Caribbean community. Of course, the Dominican Republic presentation will follow after, and so I will stick to CARICOM. For those who weren't here yesterday, the orientation of the countries that will be covered is in yellow. And of course, again, I provide some overview as to the different renewable energy options. Again, for those who weren't here yesterday, those who were here would have already seen it. It shows us that there is solar options, limited geothermal options, wind options, hydro options, and bio options under consideration. Of course, within that context, we will refer in the presentation to firm renewable energy options or firm renewable sources, which would be those that are dispatchable, such as geothermal and biomass, and to a lesser extent, hydro, which is seasonally variable. Hydro is a variable renewable, but it's variable on the seasonal basis, not on the daily basis, like wind and solar are. Wind and solar are referred to typically as variable renewables because they change, the resource changes throughout the course of a given day. Setting the orientation again, 5.5 gigawatts of generation capacity installed within CARICOM countries. We're talking about across 15 countries with approximately 17 million people. Some countries, of course, have variations in their different economies and their degree to which they are electrified. Most CARICOM countries are electrified over 85%, with the exception of Haiti. Haiti, as you know, has a very low electrification rate, and so the understanding is that there is still some degree of energy poverty within CARICOM that needs to be addressed if we were to look at the total demand being reasonable and realistic. But for the most part, CARICOM countries have electrification rates that are close to 100% in the smaller islands and as high as 85% in the mainland territories of Guyana, Suriname, and Belize. There is around a little over 10% renewable penetration. We think it's below optimum. I placed the 6 options that I showed you earlier. Hydro accounts for the lion's share of the renewable energy that we are generating within CARICOM. Over 2/3 of the renewable energy comes from hydro. That's a mix of around 180 megawatts from Suriname. There's around close to 70 megawatts from Belize in total. There is around 25 megawatts of small hydro combined in Jamaica, different hydro plants and facilities. There's around 17 megawatts in St. Vincent, and of course there's around 5 megawatts in Dominica. So that's what pretty much gives you most of the hydro. The majority of that hydro is from the large hydro resources in Suriname and Belize that is there. In respect to wind, there is a significant amount of wind due to Jamaica's own wind, what you want to call Jamaica's own wind projects. They have made significant advances over the last years, over the last 2 decades in wind. And Jamaica now has close to 80 megawatts of wind in the system. There are small wind projects in some of the other islands, some of the other places. But of course, Jamaica, as I said, accounts for the majority of the wind that we see here. Geothermal, I put there because, again, it's one of those that have high potential. There is currently no geothermal project installed in the CARICOM countries. There's only one in the Caribbean in particular, which is in Guadeloupe, but not in CARICOM. There is very active pursuit, however, of geothermal integration in the Eastern Caribbean. In December, Dominica is expected to start construction of a 7-megawatt geothermal power plant. And that will provide the first, if you want to call it, geothermal power integration within the CARICOM context. And there is active work in St. Vincent on geothermal, and to a lesser extent, there is work also in Grenada and St. Lucia and St. Kitts and Nevis. The view is that within the CARICOM context, there is as much as 900 megawatts of commercially developable geothermal power that's available. One of the key issues, however, is that this potential resides in very small islands with very low load centers. And the question of how to exploit it to benefit the rest of the region is one which has frequently come up. And so the issue of submarine interconnections is one that have been spoken about. But within the context of that mismatch of load and potential, there continues to be a challenge that is faced, not just by geothermal, but a majority of the renewable resources. The issue of wind, I spoke about solar, is interesting because whilst there is acknowledgement of the significant value of solar to the region, you can see that it's just about accounting for 11% of the renewable energy in the region. A significant amount of the solar is in Jamaica. There is some in Barbados. Jamaica has around 30 megawatts. There is that big plant now being developed in Jamaica, which in fact, and this doesn't include rooftop solar, just for the record, it's just utility scale solar. There's a big project in Jamaica now which is coming in at 8.5 cents per kilowatt hour, LCOE. It's the cheapest solar that the Caribbean would have seen so far, if it is developed in time as we expect it to. It's 8 Rivers, it's the project called 8 Rivers, and it's really in an advanced stage of development now. Construction is actually supposed to be starting this summer on that plant in Jamaica. And when finished, it will be around 30 megawatts, which will double the capacity of solar PV in Jamaica at that time. There are smaller systems in like Barbados, Antigua and Barbuda, St. Lucia, and a couple of other countries. Even the smallest country, Montserrat, which has a 2-megawatt grid, just recently integrated 250 kilowatts into that grid. So, you know, it is a 10% integration despite the fact that it's 250 kilowatts. So everybody seems to be pursuing actively solar. And I will speak about some of the challenges about those before we finish in the next couple of minutes. Biomass is on the agenda because there's a history of sugarcane production in the Caribbean. We all know the Caribbean for rum, but we also produce from sugarcane bagasse. You also have a history of bagasse sugarcane cogeneration here in Dominican Republic. So it's from cogeneration in Guyana, Jamaica, Belize, that we get that biomass in the mix. So we see what the portfolio looks like. I showed you this yesterday, which in a sense gives you a snapshot of what the total capacity installed is relative to the renewable energy. The key in respect to projects and programs is really to understand the process of decision making that goes into renewable energy projects within the Caribbean. We are constrained by many features. And so we have to go through a situation where we try to understand what are the drivers of renewable energy integration and make decisions based on criteria that we would have established prior to the project being developed. We are constrained by the size of the land that's available for the project development because many are small island states. There's competition between lands that are available for wind generation because the wind resource may be good, and other developmental features such as hotels for tourism, airports, land for airport development. So a lot of times you find that your best lands for wind may not necessarily be the ones that are most readily available, because they might be lands that were earmarked for other purposes by government or even privately owned and coming at a premium, if at all, becoming available. So we have to understand the priority goals. Is it that we're developing projects with our drivers as energy security, rural development, energy exports, or for climate change purposes? And it varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. And on that basis, it gives us the first look into what is potentially possible. And then understanding the environmental pieces in terms of what would be the environmental issues after we look at the sustainable development issues, the environmental issues, the social issues, the economic issues, before we get to proceeding with the project. Because unless the economics are right, we certainly will not be able to do much with respect to projects. One of the things that has emerged in respect to projects in the region is what we call it high transaction costs that are faced by project developers. Fact is that many of the countries do not have very functional energy markets, because the markets are very small, in many instances monopolized, with laws that may not necessarily promote renewable energy integration, and so the projects tend to become few and far in between. If there were functional energy markets that had guidelines and rules that were very open, clear, and transparent, that would be able to give assurances to those who are developing projects and give very clear indications to those who are regulating the sector in terms of what the regulatory requirements are, then maybe the markets, we would have seen a lot more penetration of renewable energy within the region. But nevertheless, this is the current state in that regard. One of the challenges that continue to also reduce renewable penetration in the region is the whole issue of variability. As I mentioned yesterday, many of the grid service operators in the region are afraid of the flexibility, of the variabilities in wind and solar, because of the fact that they do not have a lot of experiences with integrating renewables. And they have also seen in some countries issues that have emerged because of the fact that flexibility is not sometimes taken into account sufficiently. As an example, I can use Jamaica. And Peter mentioned it yesterday to an extent. When the grid studies were done, because people will say to you, you need to do the grid studies, and with the grid studies will tell you how much renewable the grid can accommodate. When the grid studies were done for Jamaica, we were told that Jamaica's grid, as it is, without investment, could accommodate up to 20% solar and wind. The government has gone ahead based on that to look for projects. And so far, Jamaica is at 15% solar and wind combined in the system. And Jamaica is now having to make investments in 36.5 megawatts of storage because of system issues that are being faced due to the variabilities that are impacting the frequency. And my colleague before me spoke about some of those frequency issues that emerges from the lack of inertia in the system when you start to remove some of the thermal generators and replace them with solar PV, etc. So, we wouldn't have expected, based on the studies, that we would have had to already start putting in storage to begin to compensate for the frequency variations at this stage, but that's the case as it is. So we have to do more in terms of understanding exactly what the impacts are and how we are going to really work through this process. At the end of the day, we recognize that wind and solar are complementary in general, and we try to look to see how wind can balance solar in the integration process. We try to ensure that we deal with ramp challenges. In Jamaica, in fact, we have put in gas as a means of dealing with some of the ramping challenges. And so Jamaica has integrated significant amounts of natural gas into its sector. It's now at 90 megawatts of natural gas, and by next year, we'll have 310 megawatts of natural gas in total in the system to deal with some of these ramping challenges, because we expect that we'll be able to manage some of those. An area that I think we need to do more work in is the issue of transport and electrification. It's something that is emerging as a key area of consideration that is going to be important to the integration of renewable energy in the context of the region, because we are talking about significant amount of electric vehicles that will require fast charging in some instances. We are talking about even buses in the public transit systems. That's what some countries are even talking about, 300 buses in a fleet changeover in 5 years. And so understanding what the demand is for transport in the countries, seeing that the countries are going to be bringing in new vehicles and a lot of these new vehicles are going to be electric transport, electric buses, we have to figure out how to match any electrification in the transport sector to some of the load profiles in the countries. We see what the different demands are by customer category in some of these countries. And we recognize that a significant amount of the electricity is from the residential sector. There's very small amounts due to industries in the countries, except for Trinidad and Tobago. The residential and commercial sectors have the most use. And what that means is that the time of the use of electricity in many of these countries are very predictable, mostly daytime electricity usage. And it means that if we are going to be tying electrification of transport into the system, we need to find the right time of day that doesn't interfere with the demand in these sectors. But these sectors, luckily for us, are predictable in terms of when they want electricity and how much they want electricity. And it gives us a chance to match our transport demand to those sector demands. And we recognize that transport will come very soon because we see the equivalence between ICEs and electric vehicles coming down, and that is driving a large part of what is happening in the transport sector. The climate thing I spoke about, we have to make sure that within the context of the integration, we consider all of the climate adaptation issues. And we are putting in processes to ensure that the resilience is built in up front within the systems through planning and system strengthening. You will hear in one of the presentations work that is going on in terms of looking at the right type of design within solar PV systems that can withstand category 4 hurricanes and so on. And those are some of the things that we are looking at and considering. But more importantly, the issue of microgrids is one that has emerged very significantly as a key portion of how we can increase the amount of renewable energy that we are integrating into our systems, as well as significantly build the resilience features within our island systems. We are looking at interconnected microgrids in a number of areas, and we are in fact looking to test it in the University of Suriname and the University of the West Indies, where we will be able to create microgrids on these campuses as micro communities, and really have the ability to island those microgrid systems whenever there is no service from the grid or whenever there is poor service from the grid. And this is something that is work in progress, so that we can look at those interconnected microgrid systems, how they can be embedded within the larger grids of the region, and how those microgrids can be islanded when required. And we have the universities network here. There are a number of university representatives here, and a part of what we are intending to do is to bring the universities on board to really help us in respect to how to accelerate renewable energy integration in the country. So the key message, ladies and gentlemen, is that we have to recognize that our energy supply systems are different. We don't have the luxury of interconnected, continuous markets that some of the larger countries have. And we have to work within small, sometimes distorted markets because of the scale issue. Scale issue is a real one, and it affects everything, including the cost of installed capacity. If you talk about global cost of installing solar PV, it's about $1,700 per kilowatt. In the Caribbean, we're talking about $3,200 per kilowatt, almost twice. A lot of it has to do with some of the issues of scale, as well as some of the issues of transaction costs that are required. And we have to also balance that against what is happening in the Caribbean region, especially within CARICOM context. We have lots of activity that is happening within the Guyana Basin in respect to fossil fuel exploration and exploitation. It's a reality, it's the elephant in the room which no one speaks about. 32 trillion cubic foot of natural gas in the Guyana Basin. 13.5 billion barrels of oil equivalent is projected. A lot of that could impact what we are attempting to do and seeking to do in respect to how the fossil industry, as it is emerging, is likely to stymie some of the investments that are necessary for renewable integration. There are 6 countries in the Caribbean, which are CARICOM Caribbean, that are now exploring and exploiting oil and gas in their deep water resources. And so that is going to be something that we have to watch as we go along. I thank you very much and look forward to your questions.
Gracias al señor Devon Gardner, gerente del Programa de Energía del CARICOM. Tenemos espacio para una pregunta y el sorteo se lo acaban de sacar aquí adelante. Tenemos aquí, es esa, digamos, esa cualidad de ser isleños también la que nos hace especiales, ¿no? Y nos hace diferentes, el hecho de ser una comunidad de islas. Así que, así como podemos tener dificultades, también eso puede convertirse en una oportunidad, me imagino. Es un comentario. Adelante.
Sí, me llama la atención que no registran sistemas de producción de energía geotérmica, de combustibles fósiles, porque no tienen industria pesada, sobre todo por sí tienen hotelería. Y una hotelería promedio de 400 habitaciones te consume entre 1.5 y 2 megas. Y sí existen procesos de autogeneración en la mayoría de los hoteles que se instalan tanto en Jamaica como en muchas de las islas, que ¿por qué no lo registran como elemento de producción de energía en las tablas que ponen?
Thank you for that question. And you make a very valid point. The issue of capturing distributed generation in the systems and how we make that a part of the official reporting in CARICOM is work in progress. We recognize it's a significant amount. In fact, in Guyana and Suriname and some of these countries where you have a lot of hinterland communities, the self-generators are even more sometimes than we know. But the issue of collecting the data and understanding the data is a challenge. And we don't want to register some and not others. We would prefer to have a systematic process where if we are going to report the data with self-generators, and then it should report all self-generators. We don't want to report with some and not others. It's better to report with no self-generators and say that the data does not include self-generators than to have data and say it includes self-generators and then it doesn't reflect the comprehensive list of self-generators. So that is the challenge.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias al señor Devon Gardner, gerente del Programa de Energía del CARICOM, con quien hemos tenido la oportunidad de compartir en más de una ocasión desde la jornada de ayer. Quienes han participado durante los 2 días han podido escuchar las diferentes conferencias que nos ha ofrecido en el marco de este Congreso. Ha llegado